Welcome along to Special Stage 8, Rally Sport Magazine's Special Stage podcast. We're doing a bit of a celebration this week on the podcast. We've got a couple of guests on, and we're going to welcome another special guest later on in the podcast, but we're going to be celebrating the life of Possum Bourne and reflecting on the man that was so impactful across our sport. I've got Peter Whitten with me, as well as Dallas Dogger. Welcome along, Peter, to you first of all. Possum Bourne was a pretty special guy, and I guess meant a lot to everybody, including you.
Oh, absolutely, Luke. Yeah, a 7-time Australian rally champion. I mean, what more could you ask for from a competitor? But such a nice fella as well. And it was a very sad day when he passed away back in 2003.
Peter, you obviously dealt with Possum from a journalist point of view, and Dallas, you spoke to him from an event perspective and from a media management point of view. What were your memories of Possum before we get too far into it?
Well, I can't exactly remember the first time I met him, but having been involved in those early days of the Asander rally and the FAI rally, he became a person that became a good friend of the event, and I think that was my first real exposure to Possum, and he was a star then, but he became. Obviously, in his later life, he became a much bigger star in terms of a rally competitor. But in those early days, he was sort of one of the guys. And, my first really good recollection with Possum was in those early days, as I said, of the Asander, in early part of the rally week. Mike Bell, the late Mike Bell, who of course was the director of the event, had a house in Theodore that he rented so that he could, administrate and run the rally and obviously reduce costs or whatever. But it was pretty common for Possum and Roger Freeth in those days to come along and either stay over or visit or whatever. And my first really good recollection was Possum sitting around the table, in Mike's kitchen. We're talking all sorts of things, rallying, and we got to dinner time, and it was decided that we should all have some pizza. So Possum jumped in the from memory, it was a blue Subaru left-hand drive recce station wagon. We went down to the Caldwell shops at an ungodly speed. Down to the Caldwell shops, picked up some pizzas, and brought them back to the house. So that's pretty well my first really good recollection. But over the course of the event, as looking after the media at the Asander rally, he was the consummate gentleman, and he was always the guy that would say, "Is there anything more that you need from us? Is there anything more that you need from Subaru?" And I can remember that between him and Nick Senior specifically, they would always provide plenty of information. As you guys would know, being in the media in rallying is basically you're fully qualified to be a CSI investigator, because you've usually got to become a forensic scientist to get the information out of crews and competitors, where Subaru were completely different. They would provide you with a bucket load of information. They give you boxes of material and handouts to give out, and probably in stark contrast to other manufacturers, say someone like Mitsubishi, who would give you a black and white photograph of which they asked to be returned after you'd used it. That was about the size of what some competitor organisations would provide, but the reality was that Subaru did a really good job. My second most common memory of Possum was we were in the headquarters of the Asander. It's known commonly as the Asander. And forgive me, guys, but the year, I just can't remember. Mike had called a meeting of the top crews to come bring them in and say, look, conditions have worsened pretty badly. Green Hills is a real problem, but, we've got the spectator point is full of spectators. I'm just not quite sure what we should do. Possum's words were, well, what do you want me to do, boss? And I was sort of a little bit taken back from that, because usually, crews, sometimes I'm not saying they throw the towel in pretty easy, but as soon as it gets a bit wet or slippery or whatever, sometimes they just want to stop. Mm-hmm. But Possum was, his first reaction was, there's spectators out there. we have to entertain them. I'll go out and I'll put on a show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what he did on Saturday afternoon. He went out and put on a show. He knew in reality that, it could affect the result. But, his understanding of the importance of the event and its success in Canberra cannot be underestimated. And he was the driving force through those early years of the success of that event.
Yeah, that's right. And it's such a long-running event, that Canberra event, whether it be the FAI, like you mentioned, Dallas, or whether it's the National Capital Rally at the minute. It's such a heartland for rallying. Peter, your memory of Possum was not dissimilar to Dallas's. Your first memory was in a kitchen as well, I believe. Was that was that a little bit earlier, or sort of similar time frame?
A bit earlier, I think, Luke. The first time I interviewed Possum was in 1993 over in Western Australia in Perth for the Forest Rally, and I remember quite vividly it was the morning, I think, before the rally started, or that the rally started, and Possum and I were sitting around his kitchen table. Roger Freeth was sitting beside us, sort of working through the pace notes and looking through all the instructions for the day, and Possum's wife Peggy was in the kitchen making breakfast and getting sandwiches and stuff organised for lunch. And then a few years later, I did another interview with him in Queensland. I'm pretty sure it was at Caloundra on the day that the recce finished. And once again, we were sitting at the kitchen table in Possum's apartment. He was devouring a pasta and a salad like you wouldn't believe while he was giving answers to my interviews. So he was one of those guys that, as Dallas, I guess, mentioned, he could really multitask. I mean, there was nothing that was too much trouble for him, whether it was be helping out the media or signing autographs for fans or putting on a show on the stages.
That's right. And from those two, I guess, first meetings, it comes across to me as though he was, of course, more than welcoming of his time. And he would invite people into his circle, whether it be media people from, I guess, Australian Rally Sport News, in your case, Peter, and from your case, Dallas, from the event. He would welcome people into his circle, regardless of what he was doing. And I guess that's in line of the promotional side of Possum, that was so conscious of what was going on around him. Dallas, I guess that fits in well with you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, even earlier recollections too was, I used to look after the media for Michael Thompson's Dell team. And, we did that for a number of years. And Mike Thompson had a very close relationship with Possum and his team, actually purchasing one of his cars and competing. And, I know that in those early years, Mike and Possum particularly, they had lots of talks about, preparations of cars and whatever. And of course, Mike was, seconded into that local team with himself and Possum, to run the manufacturers' championship prize in Western Australia when Rally Australia was on. So, again, just having these anecdotal enjoyable times with Possum were it was just part of the rally psychic at the time. And it was interesting. Another recollection I have of him is in the 2000 Rally of Queensland. It was a very interesting event. He had the World Rally car there. Neil had the Toyota World Rally car, and Mike Thompson was competing. We were helping out there, and Mike rang me on my mobile and said, "Look, I haven't got any tarmac tyres. Can I nick your tyres off your WRX?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I met him down at the bottom of the at the service, and we swapped the wheels and tyres over from my road car, which had these Michelin Pilot Sports on them. We swapped them over, and then Mike would run up the hill climb with those, and we'd swap them back a bit later. But anyway, I thought, this has got to be something worth watching, this hill climb, with these World Rally cars. At that stage, no one had really, we were only just starting to get an idea of just really how good they were. So anyway, I managed to get back up to the top, and if anybody knows the Noosa hill climb, it's a horrific walk from the entry all the way down through these rocks and, steep and rugged, way to get down to the spectator point. And the spectator point is like a left three around, like a blind left three around a bluff. And we got there and we were waiting and the commentary's going or whatever. And then the heavens open. And I mean, it really, really started to bucket down. Car zero came through and he couldn't even really see where he was going. I mean, you could hardly see the road. And we thought, oh, surely they'll call it off. They'll put a halt to the stage until this rain event goes. But anyway, you could hear this engine revving, and it was Possum, and We all stood there, and then these four shards of light appeared, and he did a double Scandinavian flick into this left three, and all that you could see was these four lights sliding around the corner at 45 degrees up into the spectator point, and the crowd went absolutely berserk. It was the most magical thing you've ever seen. Neil attempted to do the same thing, but he was about 10 or 15 kilometres slower, and then everybody else was, please go home. It was, it really was nowhere near the speed and effort that Possum put in there. And he knew that spectators would be there, and he just put on a show. And that's the guy that I think that typifies what he was. He was a showman.
Possum wasn't always the easiest bloke to talk to either. I mean, there were times when things weren't going his way, and he was difficult to talk to. It was, if the car was not playing what he wanted it to do, Possum was tough to work with. And I specifically remember the start of the 2002 Australian Rally Championship, when the World Rally cars had been banned. The Group A cars basically had been banned as well, and we'd gone back to Group N. And everybody, including myself, said Possum's not going to handle this. His driving style is too flamboyant to master a Group N car. And the first event, I think, was the Premier State Rally based out of Sydney and up to Gosford. And Possum retired from both heats, and everybody said, yeah, well, there you go. Possum's not going to win. But he went and tested that car to within an inch of its life, and he refined his driving style. And by the end of the series, he won the ARC for a seventh time. So he really did know how to fight and actually get the best out of things.
I think what a lot of people in the sport may or may not know was that Possum actually drove the development of not only the cars that he was driving, but the sport in general. He was a strong motivator at Subaru Australia. He would drive them and try and drive them to a commercial outcome. And what I mean by that was that his team was funded by contributions from WRXs sold in Australia. So the more he did with promoting the WRX brand in Australia, the more he actually was funded for his team. So it was very common to see Possum at dealer nights. I attended a few of them here in Brisbane, and he would captivate the audience, and they would take orders that night. Those blue and gold Subarus, the WRX blue, with gold wheels, was a perfect example of how you can use rallying to sell motor cars. And I can't say to this day that I have seen as much involvement, even with Hyundai with their N program, GR Yaris, these sort of cars. I mean, there is still a disconnect between the way in which those cars are marketed and the way in which the rally teams work. I don't know why that is. One day we might investigate that in another forum. But the reality was Possum was the man on the ground that would go spend those times at those dealer nights, because he knew that if cars were sold, it would directly finance his team.
The turn from World Rally cars to the Group N cars was, I guess, the biggest change in Australian rallying, or that it had in a long time. Possum and Neil were the ones on the back foot, and Peter, you would have reported on it at the time. They weren't all that happy about it, but once they got into it, they embraced it and realized that, hey, this is really good for the sport. It's bringing everybody closer together from a competition side of things. And really, in those first 3, 4, 5 years of the Group N Australian Rally Championship, it blossomed, didn't it?
It sure did, Luke. And I think at the time, there was obviously the two separate categories. There was the World Rally cars, and that was pretty much the Neil Bates Toyota and Possum Bourne Subaru show. And then there was the Group N cars after that, with your Ed Ordinskys and your Cody Crockers and your Scott Petters and those sort of guys. It did bring it together, and successfully, I must say. It was a tough call at the time. And I remember it was a bit like, and Dallas would remember this, it was a bit like when they banned Group G in the 1980s, that suddenly these super fast, exciting cars to watch had been banned, and we'd gone to a car that was more production style. And it did take a year or so for that to come on board. But as we know, Toyota developed the Group NP Corolla. We saw Subaru introduce, obviously Cody Crocker was there, but Dean Herridge joined the team as well. There was a 2-car Mitsubishi team. So it really was one of the golden ages of rallying when that Group N series ran, and we did have multiple manufacturers.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the way that it was ran back then. It was a very consistent series, and it's sort of in a way how things are getting to at the minute? Consistency in events, consistency in entries and stuff like that. At the minute, 2023 started really well in terms of an Australian Rally Championship series, and we're getting to a point where the competition is so great at the minute that we're getting towards those sort of times of those early 2000s years where Possum and Neil did so well, and I guess it's moving forward. Does the impact of Possum, has it stopped, I guess, Dallas? Are we still feeling the effects, and are we still reminiscing on Possum?
I think we do to some extent. I think some of it fades along the way as the shape of the current model car dissipates to something a bit different. The current WRX is obviously not the refined rally weapon that it was somewhat, 20 odd years ago. I mean, it's a car that's evolved into something somewhat different. I think that those who are rallying now have their heroes, and Possum was one of those. And I think that the fact that he brought the World Rally car to Australia, Toyota responded by dishing up a World Rally car for Neil, and it also helped Neil Bates to lift his game. Neil is a strong competitor, but he needed Possum Bourne to drive him to go that next level, and that's the current situation that you've identified, Luke. We need people like Harry and Lewis and those guys to drive those cars as fast as they can, because you then need people to chase them and try and beat them. And we now have cars that are closer and closer and closer in terms of competition, and they are very similar to that period of time. But I don't believe we've had as good a time as we have now, because, when you look at, say, the R5 car, I mean, there's over 4,000 of those variants around the world currently rallying in regional championships all around the world. And you could even argue that WRC2, or the R5 category, is actually really the premier category in the world, because there's so many people competing in so many cars around the world. And it hasn't been since that Group N day that you could pick up a Group N car here. Like, for instance, it would have been very easy for Neil or Possum or any of those guys to pick up their Group N cars and take them worldwide and compete in them. And I think, from memory, Cody Crocker did it in New Zealand. You could move those cars around and then compete against the best in the world. And if drivers here want to be the best in the world, they have to cut their teeth against the best in the world. You can't just compete against the locals and drive slow enough to beat each other. You've got to actually compete against the best guys, because it's the only way you're going to really lift your game.
Yeah, that's right. And we saw that with Hayden Paddon when he came across at the Coast Rally. He was a class above the field for a lot of the event. But then again, at times, there was guys, Harry Bates was pretty fast in comparison to him, as well as Nathan Quinn. So you've got to have that benchmark that's above. And really, that's what Possum and Neil were in those times.
Yes, they were the benchmark. And you only had to go to an event, and look, everybody was, even in their Group N cars at the day, trying to say, gee, if I could just get within 2 seconds a kilometre or 1 second a kilometre, it would be really good. But it pushed them even in their Group N cars. It was a crazy guy who thought he could beat Possum Bourne in a WRC car. But the other thing that it did too was, we were not quite starved of WRC action here in Australia, but we could see the cars that were competing on the world stage here in Australia. Now we're seeing the same thing again. We've got a number of R5 cars. They compete on the world stage. The cars that are running at the top end of the field, they are world class class. They're not world rally cars, but they're not far off in terms of what they can do and how they can perform. And at the end of the day, rallying is a spectacle. So again, Possum's legacy of bringing that car in, would have Toyota done what they did and run a WRC car against him, I'm not certain that they would have.
Peter, you spoke to Peggy Bourne recently. We've got an episode of the podcast coming with her. You interviewed her for an hour. Did you want to explain a little bit how that went and what subscribers can hear from Peggy when that one comes out?
Yeah, certainly, Luke. And I did speak to Peggy, as you say, and had a quick chat off air to Spencer, which is Peggy's youngest son, who's really the spitting image of Possum in so many different ways. But yeah, I chatted to Peggy, and it wasn't, probably surprisingly, it wasn't really a chat about rallying. Of course, that was the overall topic. But I mean, we chatted about lots of things about where they met and how they met and what Possum was like as a person, what Possum was like as a father and a husband, and the sort of stuff that we didn't know about the man. Of course, there were lots of people who were close to him, but it was a really engaging story, and it was great to catch up with Peggy again after a lot of years. And it came a couple of days after they had a celebration in New Zealand in Pukekohe for Possum's the 20th anniversary of his death, which is coming up next week. And yeah, it was a wonderful chat, and I really encourage people to listen to it because there's some stories there that people wouldn't have heard before.
Fantastic. I look forward to listening to that one. Dallas, before we move on and welcome Chris Kitzen along for Peter's interview with him, is there anything you want to add on Possum Bourne, the man that was and the man that you dealt with throughout many years?
Well, from a media point of view, he was the consummate guy that would always be available for an interview. He was always happy and cheerful. He was always good for a good comment. He wasn't the guy that you stuck a microphone in the window and just got that was a good stage. He always would say something that was newsworthy, and I think that was good. And that's something that any driver should be able to take something from, is that, if you're being interviewed, say something that's important and, really try to entertain as well. And Possum was a guy that would put on a show. And I suppose as we reminisce, as the passing of Possum, one of the toughest events was his funeral. It was a pretty tough event.
Mm.
Yeah, as I guess, ironically, as the rally world is mourning the death of Craig Breen over the past week, that we're remembering 20 years since Possum, and in a lot of ways they were very similar characters, and certainly in their personality, where rallying was their number one love, and that's what they lived for, and they were so passionate about what they did, and that came across in interviews and in stories that you read and vision that you saw. Possum was just one of those guys that captivated the sport and captivated the spectators, and you only had to rock up to a rally of Canberra and see 150 WRXs at the Subaru festival there to see how much of an impact he had on the sport, and also similar to what Toyota have done with some of their younger drivers with the Bates boys, and also Simon Evans when he was driving there. But Possum was the mentor for Cody Crocker and for Dean Herridge, and to see those guys come through and succeed was as much Possum's doing as it was their own, I believe.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Dallas, for your thoughts on the man that was Possum Bourne, and his legacy lives on. And yeah, again, I appreciate you sharing your memories on the man that you dealt with throughout many years in our great sport. So thanks again.
Chris Kitzen, welcome along. You're one of the head mechanics and the head honchos at Possum Bourne Motorsport. It's good to have a chat.
Maybe. Yeah. Yes, it is good to have a chat.
Yeah. Does it seem like 20 years since Possum's passing?
Oh, definitely not. It's just gone in a flash, really. We look at things and I look back and it's just, time has just evaporated.
To the rally fan, I guess the younger rally fan who didn't know Possum or wasn't alive when he was around, describe him to a rally fan.
One of the boys, really. He didn't mind mucking in. You never let him touch your tools, but he was one of the boys. He enjoyed the social side of things as well. Very much a people person, easy to get along with, and seemed to bring people with him quite easily.
Yeah. You first started working with him, I think, in 1988, which was, I guess, the first year of the Rally Australia test event when Possum was still driving Subaru RX turbos. What do you remember about those times and when you joined the team?
Well, I didn't go to Rally Australia that year, but Kevin Sanderson was already working for Possum, and Kevin Sanderson was a neighbour of mine here at work. He used to do automatic transmissions, and I said to Kev one time, if Possum ever needs an extra hand, I'd be quite happy to come along. So that's pretty much how I started, and I think the first event I did was probably Rally New Zealand that year. Mine's a little hazy now. It's been a lot of years, but that's pretty much how it started.
Yeah, and back then in the late 80s, I guess it was probably a pretty basic operation operating out of Possum Shed.
Yep, we operated at a Possum Shed. I remember the the Leones of the day. There was no tunable ECUs. Snow used to fiddle with the cold start on the cars and put bigger Jag and green injectors in them and get them to run a bit richer that way, with the cams and things. But it was before electronic tuning as such, really.
And I guess from a mechanic side of things, once they moved from the RX Turbo or Leone to the Liberty Legacy, it would have been a huge change in not only performance, but in how successful the team became.
Yeah, well, Possum's first car was the car that he drove in the Safari Rally, the Japanese. I assume they gifted it to him. That came out for Rally New Zealand, and it was a totally different kettle of fish. Quite a lot more advanced. We thought it was going to be a game changer. I think it was a bit early to say that, but it definitely was a step up from the RX Turbo for sure.
Yeah, because that first car was a Castrol-sponsored car, which he originally ran in the New Zealand Championship.
It was, yes. Quite basic, really, by comparison to the Group A Pro Drive cars, but it's still, it had some good kit in it.
Yeah, and what do you remember about the move to Australia with the Australian Championship and getting that Group A car from Pro Drive in the UK? I mean, was Possum the driving force behind all that?
Oh, for sure. Possum, I'm not sure how it came about, but Possum had been over and done a rally with Pro Drive. Ken Rees, I think, navigated for him, who was a later team manager, rally coordinator. And the car, obviously Possum did a deal. He was good at doing deals. He might have had some support from STI. It came across, and then I'm not sure how we got to do Rally Australia. The Australian Rally Championship, because I really wasn't involved in that sort of things. And it's so long ago, it's just hard to remember all the details, to be honest.
Yeah, and at this stage, were you working for Possum Bourne Motorsport full time, or were you still running your own operation?
I've never worked for Possum Bourne Motorsport full time.
Okay,
yep. A lot of people thought I did. I pretty much did every event he did, and I used to just leave my business, leave staff running it, and head off overseas. If Possum was overseas, I was overseas pretty much.
Yeah, and Possum's drive saw the team expand, as we said, into the Australian Championship, but also into the Asia Pacific Championship and eventually the WRC. Was Possum always the do-it-all sort of guy who would handle the sponsorship, the management, the car preparation, the driving? I mean, he was always there?
Yeah, not so much the car prep. That was left to the guys, mostly the full-timers.
Yeah.
He certainly did all the deals for all the drives and things. There's no question of that. He was a driving force behind that. And Kuze-san, was the president of STI, and I think he was just like a son to him in those days. He certainly got great treatment from STI.
He obviously had an incredible knack to get sponsors on board and to get manufacturers backing and all those sorts of things, and obviously even the people that were working for him at the time.
Yeah, he could talk, that's for sure. He had the gift of the gab, that's for 100%.
Yeah, what do you think drove him to such success? Because obviously his driving career was incredible in itself, but to run that team as he did for so long, it must have been a pretty hard effort from him.
I think just he wanted to be, a champion. He had the drive to do it. He just had a pretty much single-minded approach to it and get it done. And those around him seemed to have the same drive, and we all were striving for a common goal.
Yeah, and the car's obviously a nice long range of Subarus, from the Legacy right through to all the different variations of the Impreza and the WRX and the World Rally cars, and even the Group N cars. Possum's cars, or the Possum Bourne Motorsport cars, always seem to be the best cars out there. Certainly, they won 10 championships in a row in Australia. What do you think that was? Was it the backing behind the team? Was it the people involved?
I think it was a combination of everything. We had some guys, long-term guys working on the car, such as myself. We were 100% dedicated to the cause. Possum was 100% dedicated to the cause. He had some good sponsors. We had some good money to have some good gear, and we had some really good cars. And the Subarus were, once we got a few years under the track, down the track with the likes of the Impreza. They were just about unbeatable.
Yeah. Did you have a favourite car of all those variations?
Yeah, I guess if a car I'd like to own is an early Group A legacy, but the Impreza was the 96 Impreza that we started with, which Stu Weber now owns. That was a great car. We had so much success with that. We knew it sort of inside and out. It was just a great piece of engineering.
Yeah. You spent a lot of time in Australia following the Australian Championship with the team. How did you see the changes in our championship over that time, and also the quality of the competition that Possum had to deal with?
Everybody sort of tried to step up, or did step up. I think we turned up in the early days and we all had team kit and we all had same overalls and stuff, and then that sort of started a bit of a trend, and things just got more professional as the years went by. We just kept going at it and just tried to I guess set the standard.
And obviously in 2002, after the World Rally Cars were banned from the Australian Championship, it went to a full Group N championship. And everybody said at the time that Possum wouldn't cope, that his driving style was too flamboyant, that he wouldn't be able to make the Group N car go fast enough to win. But it only took one or two events and he was actually winning. How did you see him through those times, and what did he do to actually change his style?
Well, the first event, I mean, we heard those same comments, and the first event was a bit of a disaster. I think it was a DNF from memory.
Yeah, I think it blew an engine in Perth.
Yeah. So, now Possum's in the same car as the rest of us. We'll see how he goes, and he's not going very well. But I think the drive was there. It was just a matter of doing some fine tuning and getting the car to where he wanted. I think it was key to having it left-hand drive.
Yep.
There's no future in going from left to right-hand drive. We had that issue when we did the World Championship for Group N, the PW Production World Championship, when we went to Sweden. And that was a right-hand drive car, and that didn't work out that well as well. But it was okay, but he would have been better in a left-hand drive car.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, the 2003 championship, after he won the ARC for the 7th time in a row, the plan was for the full production world championship in the Group N Subaru, but tragically that didn't happen. And shortly after Rally New Zealand, he had his accident at the Race to the Sky. Without getting too personal, it must have been a horrible thing for the whole team, and a situation that I guess is, where do you go next?
Yeah, it was more than difficult, I'd have to say. I was with the car. I took the car into Queenstown. We were doing the PR stuff, and we were in Queenstown, and I got a call from Peggy in the chopper saying that he'd had an accident and they were on the way to Dunedin Hospital. And but at that stage, of course, we didn't understand the severity of the accident. So
yes, yeah.
But it was definitely a difficult part of my life.
How do you fill the void in your work and your personal life after something like that, Chris? Because obviously that was a huge part of what you were doing every day of the week.
It took a few years, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it was the most affected I've ever been by somebody's passing, shall we say.
Yeah.
I started reading his book because it was released shortly after he passed, and I got partway through it and I put it down, and I haven't picked it up since.
Really? Yeah, 20 years on.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I sit at my computer at home, at my desk at home, and it's sitting up on the bookshelf, and every time I look up, I see it there. I think I must read it one day.
Yeah, you think you'll get back to it?
Yeah, I think I will, but I'm not sure when.
Yeah. So how did you fill the void after that? I mean, were you still involved in rallying? Were you still with the team for the rest of that season?
Yeah, I saw that season out, and then I decided that the time was up, and just concentrated on my work and did a few other things. Started doing a bit of competing myself again, which I had done before I met Possum. I still work on the World Rally Car that Vantage Motorsport own.
Yeah.
So we do events like the Leadfoot Festival. We've done Race to the Sky once that's been held, or it's been held a few times since then, but only once in the last 10 years or so. We've done Ashley Forest in it.
Yep.
And that sort of fills a little void. It's few and far between, and especially with COVID in the last few years, we've done very little with it.
Yeah, and of course the car ran with Alistair McRae driving it at the Super Special at Rally New Zealand last year.
Yeah, it did. He had Peter Solberg with him. We took it out to, it was my job to take it out to the Super Special Jack's Ridge.
Yep.
And got it out there, and in the pouring rain, I got drowned getting it out there on the Saturday afternoon, and got it all set up for Alistair. Started it up. He said, "All right, we're ready to go." Started it up, let it warm up for about 5 minutes. Alistair got in it, put it in gear. It didn't even get off the ground sheet. The engine stopped, and I thought, "Oh, that doesn't sound good." It wasn't revving or anything like that, but turns out that the spat the cam belt off due to one of the cam gears. It fractured and got on a wobbly and spat the belt off, and that was the end of it.
And went no further from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously you've still been involved in rallying a little bit. You said, what sort of competing have you been doing?
Well, I ran out of talent and rolled my escort in a hill climb, so that hasn't been fixed. It's been a few years. I've got a new shell for that. But I've got quite a few other escorts and things as well.
Yeah.
I've been president of the Pukko Car Club in the interim as well for 3 years. I'm a clerk of the course organising events. We've got a rally sprint, which is the first round of the Northern Region Rally Sprint Series. I'm clerk of the course for that, and I've got personal interests in classic cars and things that's sort of my cup of tea these days.
Yeah, it's good to hear. And I believe when Possum's son Spencer did the Auckland rally there a couple of years ago, that you were involved in that process as well.
Well, I was initially, and I was supposed to be out there helping, but a couple of weeks before it happened, I busted my Achilles in my left leg, and I was in plaster for 6 weeks, and I couldn't walk for 3 months. So that was the end of it for me. I couldn't even get out to Jack's Ridge to go and watch anything. I just couldn't walk, and crutches out there on that ground just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, it must have been great to see Spencer out there competing, though.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I watched it on TV. It was he was fulfilling a dream, and he did very well at it.
Yeah, and I guess the beauty of something like that too is that nobody expected Spencer to go out there and replicate his dad's heroics, I guess, for want of a better word. But just to see him out there competing was a wonderful thing.
Oh, it was great. And Taylor had a go a few years ago as well. He did the Possum Bourne Memorial Rally, which was tacked on to, I think, Rally New Zealand in 2012. He did that as well. So that both the boys have had a go.
Yeah, and of course Peggy's had a run as well.
She has, yes, at Race to the Sky, yes.
Yeah. And finally, Chris, do you think that rallying in New Zealand will ever see another Possum Bourne? Obviously, Hayden Paddon's gone on to some tremendous results and winning a round of the World Championship, but arguably he hasn't got the following or the charisma that surrounded Possum Bourne. Do you think we'll ever see another Possum?
Well, Possum was one of a kind, so probably not. But Possum's doing it. Hayden's doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, yeah. And what about seeing Subaru back in the World Championship? I mean, obviously it's well out of your understanding, or sorry, not your understanding, but well out of your capabilities of getting it organised. But you'd love to see it again.
Oh, absolutely, but I don't think it'll ever happen. Word on the street after it happened, the way it ended with ProDrive, I don't think it'll ever happen again.
Yeah, yeah. Chris, it's been wonderful to catch up for this short little catch up, and thank you for the chat. And I hope that the celebration of the 20th anniversary goes very well.
I'm sure it will.
Good on you, mate. Thanks.
Cheers, mate.